Good evening, everyone. Good evening. We're going to get started in just a minute or so I'll just give you a chance to get settled. Just give another minute to get settled. I think 2017 is going to be a good year. There's lots of energy in the room tonight. Okay, so welcome to the Lougheed College Lectures. It's great to see all of you here tonight on this beautiful snowy evening. I'm thrilled with the weather, I have to say. My name is Rhonda Breikreitz. I'm an associate professor here at the University of Alberta, and I'm the lead instructor for this course, Topics in Leadership, that you're all involved with tonight, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you here. I'd like to ask if there's anybody that's at the Lougheed College Lectures for the first time. Great, good turnout. So welcome to all of you. We hope that you will come back again for the following 3 lectures that we have for the rest of this term. As we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are situated on Treaty 6 territory, traditional lands of First Nations and Métis people. Tonight, we're thrilled to have Dr. Shawna Pandya come and speak with us about emotional intelligence, and her talk is called The Mortar Between the Bricks, Emotional Intelligence. And before I introduce her, I just want to talk a little bit about the context of the Lougheed College Lectures to give you an idea of how this endeavor got started. The University of Alberta has a new strategic plan entitled For the Public Good. And at the Peter Lougheed Leadership College, we aim to equip students with knowledge, skills, and experiences that will enable them to lead in various contexts that will move our city, our province, our nation, and perhaps maybe even the international community toward the good society. And so when the college started 2 years ago, we had this vision of creating a place, a context, an environment where students could really engage in challenging ideas and really enhance their skills in leadership so that they're ready for the many challenges that they will have in the future as they go into their leadership positions. And we're thrilled to have all of them here. Maybe you can all give a wave, Lougheed scholars. There they are, all across the room. And we're thrilled to have other members of the public and the university community here as well. So thank you once again for joining us tonight. The purpose of this lecture series is to expose students to provocative research and to big ideas that will challenge their thinking and inspire action as they move forward. And our program began in August 2015. It's been a whirlwind of activity since that time. Our program is for undergraduate students from any discipline across campus. And we're really proud of that whatever discipline students are engaged in, they can participate in this college. We think it's important for people from a great range of backgrounds to come together and to grapple with leadership ideas together. And so we've developed our program with that in mind, and we think that it's the best way to create and develop leaders for our diverse society in which we live. I now just have a few announcements. You saw when you came in that we have the Campus Food Bank. The Campus Food Bank is here for all of our lectures. If you would like to bring a donation or money, a food item or money, we welcome you to do that. That's much appreciated by the Campus Food Bank. We are also recruiting for next year already. So if you know somebody that will be entering third-year university next year that would like to find out about the program, or even if they're not quite there yet, please encourage them to go look at our website. There will be information sessions available, and there will be information on the website about the application process. So please spread the word around so that we can get applications for our next cohort of students. For our address tonight, I ask that you do not take any audio or video recordings, but if you'd like to take photos and tweet them out, you're welcome to do that. For tonight, we're going to run this lecture until 7:15. It's going to start with the lecture from our speaker, Dr. Pandya, followed by a public conversation with Dr. Pandya and the principal of our college, the Right Honorable Kim Campbell. At 7:15, we'll say goodbye, and then the students and Dr. Pandya will resume the second half of the class in the different classrooms. Our next lecture is on January 23rd. It's on team building. And Mr. Chris Morris, who is the head coach of our football team here at the U of A, will be giving that lecture. So we encourage you to put that in your calendar as well. I also wanted to mention that we have students at Augustana campus and also viewers from Red Deer College that are watching via live stream, and we'd like to welcome and acknowledge their presence as well. I'd now like to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Shawna Pandya. For Dr. Pandya, life has just been one big adventure after another. Prepared with backgrounds in neuroscience, space studies, entrepreneurship, and medicine, Dr. Pandya has led a life devoted to technology, innovation, social development, and adventure. In 2015, Dr. Pandya successfully completed scientist-astronaut candidate training and was part of the first crew to test a commercial spacesuit in zero gravity. I don't really know what that means, but it sounds really impressive. In 2016, Dr. Pandya was named to the Prime Crew and Medical Advisory Board for Project Poseidon, which aims to further ocean and space exploration, while simultaneously setting a world record for the most days spent under the sea at 100 days. It's unimaginable to me. Her current research focuses on resilience and human performance in extreme environments. Dr. Pandya recently started a practice in medicine, and cementing her commitment to extreme environment medicine, she has recently undertaken a fellowship with the Academy of Wilderness Medicine. Throughout her medical career, Dr. Pandya has had many unique experiences through rotations in cardiac surgery in India, orthopedic surgery in Ecuador, reconstructive surgery at Stanford, and aerospace medicine at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston. She also comes from a long history of public service and innovation. She currently sits on numerous boards and committees, including the Board of Advisors for Students for the Exploration and Development of Space Canada and the International Lunar Observer Association Board of Directors. She is the current Life Sciences Chair with the Canadian Space Society. For her work, she has received many awards. She was named a Peter Lougheed Scholar, the University of Alberta's highest distinction for excellence in academia and leadership. And I should note that that's not the same as our Lougheed Scholars, but you can all aspire to that. She was also given the University of Alberta Faculty of Medicine's John W. Scott Award, as she was deemed the most likely to hold a distinguished position in medicine. In 2012, she was named to Alberta Ventures' list of next 10 young leaders to watch. She was a recipient of the 2013 Pride of Strathcona Award for Career Achievement and a recipient of the 2016 Global Women of Vision Award, among many others. In addition to her many accomplishments, Dr. Pandya is an advanced diver. She is also working toward a National Outdoor Leadership School Wilderness Medicine Upgrade certification, a private pilot's license, and a solo skydiving license. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Shawna Pandya.
Thank you so much for having me tonight. First of all, can everyone hear me? Perfect. Kind of? Sort of. Perfect. That all sounds more impressive than it is. Don't worry about it. So tonight we're here to talk about emotional intelligence. And in preparing for this talk, I read broadly around the topic because I needed to inform myself as to what it was. And I came across a variety of opinions. I came across one quote that said, "Emotional intelligence is defined as the ability to perceive and express emotions, to use emotions to facilitate thinking and understand and reason with emotions, and to effectively manage emotions within oneself and within relationships with others." I found another source that said emotional intelligence, it falls part of social and personal competencies. On the personal competency side, emotional intelligence consists of self-awareness, confidence, self-regulation, conscientiousness, and motivation. Social competence consists of empathy and social skills, as well as communication and conflict management. More simply put, the underlying premise of emotional intelligence is that people who are more sensitive to their own emotions and the emotions of others will be more effective leaders. And basically what I learned from at least these 3 quotes is that everyone has their own idea of what emotional intelligence is. And with discussing with Dr. Breithartz and leading up to this lecture, we came to a more simple definition. Emotional intelligence is being the adult in the room. And being the adult in the room comes down to maturity. So frankly, I'm just as surprised that I'm up here as you are. If you know me in my personal life, I'm a little bit more sarcastic than I am tonight. So we're going to talk about emotional intelligence, maturity, being the adult in the room. And we've talked a little bit about what the definition is. But I'm going to spend the next part of this hour talking about what facets of emotional intelligence exist that I've experienced through my own life experiences. We're going to talk about how we can cultivate emotional intelligence. And finally, we're going to talk about why it matters. The way I think of emotional intelligence is the mortar between the bricks. Because when I think of leaderships, I think of the brick part of a brick wall. I think of the head of the boardroom, take charge, make decisive actions type of leader. But I think we can all agree that any leader who doesn't lead with subtlety, nuance will not be a leader for long. So I want to talk about that mortar, what holds the brick wall together, because a brick wall without mortar is not functional. So I want to talk about the first part of emotional intelligence, and that comes down to emotional mastery and self-control and detachment. So when I think of emotional intelligence, the first thing I think about is self-regulation with emotion, both within myself and within others, and how I can use that awareness to foster relationships. Now, before we go any further, I want to be clear that emotional intelligence doesn't mean shunning emotion or failing to express emotion or acting like a robot. In fact, some of the best people I know, some who are deemed the most macho, are also the most emotionally evolved. And I refer, of course, to friends who are active duty military service members who have seen the worst of what this world has to offer, but who also have the courage to say things like, I'm not okay, I'm depressed, and also deal with those emotions. And that's what I want to talk about when I mention emotional mastery and self-control and detachment. So I've thrown a little bit of academia at you with all these definitions from various researchers. And the last bit of academia I'm going to throw at you for this lecture consists of dissecting what emotion is and how the response comes up. So a long, long time ago, many, many years ago at this university, I was an undergrad in neuroscience here, and I took this class called Biosocial Psychology 278. And it's a great class. I don't think it's still around because it was a long, long time ago. And we don't need to get into the nitty-gritty of it, but we examined different theories of emotional arousal and how emotional response comes out. And basically, again, we don't need to focus on the details, but there's various components as to how emotions are processed, and the jury's still out as to how emotions, in fact, come about. But what we can all agree on is there's a stimulus component. So say there's a rattlesnake or an oncoming car. Your brain processes that as danger. What happens next and in what sequence as to whether that is the immediate sensation of fear versus the immediate sensation of psychological discomfort, whether it's a scream or a racing heart or sweaty palms, is out to lunch. But my point in letting you know that there's theories about emotional arousal is that this is the first step into realizing that we have power and control over our own emotions. So what I mean by that is by clinically studying and objectively taking the idea of emotional arousal and control, we can take the first step towards recognizing negative emotions for what they are. So what I mean by that is we have dark, burning sensation in our heart. We interpret that as anger or irritability. We have a globus sensation in our throat. We interpret that as sadness. The next step is to take a step back and detach and say, I'm feeling irritable, I'm feeling sad, and then recognize these emotions for what they are, negative emotions, and then take the next step and make that conscious decision to not engage or turn that emotion or action around. So let's look at a real life example now. Who here has ever received an angry email? Who here has been tempted to or has actually responded to an angry email? Does anyone regret that? So about 10 years ago, when I was in my early 20s, I used to be the master of passive-aggressive, verbose, excessively long, but eloquent emails. And it felt so good, because I would get the last word and no one could trump my verbosity. But I really wish that this pop-up existed. Because at the end of the day, what did I achieve other than massaging my own ego and maybe burning a few bridges? So I want to talk now about conflict and crisis and the value of communication in conflict and crisis. And I want to tell you a couple of stories from my training as a citizen scientist astronaut. Oh, it didn't show up. So that was supposed to be a photo of me training at the NASTAR centrifuge facility down in Philadelphia. And that was when I learned firsthand why you're not supposed to fly with lithium-ion batteries. So, story time. One of my colleagues is a scientist and very smart guy, and he constructed his own temperature sensing device, which is powered by lithium-ion battery. He got the appropriate permissions, he flew it on the centrifuge, and it was really neat because when he was done with the centrifuge, he plugged it into his computer, and we had this spreadsheet that updated in real time, and we could see in real time as the temperature went up by 0.1 increments, and then when it went up by entire degrees Celsius increments. And then we noticed his pocket was smoking. And then we realized we were in a multi-billion-dollar centrifuge facility, and we realized we should do something about that. And it wasn't me who took charge in this situation, but it was my other friend who was an Army pilot, helicopter pilot veteran who was used to working in operational and high-stress situations. So what did my friend do? He grabbed that lithium-ion battery and ran down the hall. And I didn't have a plan, and he didn't have a plan, but I trusted him that he really got that, and I was just there for support. And his plan at the time consisted of finding the nearest fire exit, karate kicking it open, screaming obscenities, hurling the thing to the ground, and then putting the smoldering mess out of its misery with a fire extinguisher. But what I learned from that is that it was a learning experience. First of all, don't fly with lithium-ion batteries. Not even a centrifuge, which isn't really flying, but don't do it. But what I learned from this was a valuable example in action and followership. For those of you who have ever studied patterns of communication in high-stress situations, or who've read Atul Gawande and the Checklist Manifesto, you might be familiar with the pattern of escalating communication. So there's the question, there's the statement, there's the question, the suggestion, the statement, and the command. So translating this into action, at the centrifuge, there was the question, oh hey, why is the temperature going up? Suggestion, the temperature's going up, I think something's wrong. Statement, your pocket's smoking, we should do something about that. And command, let's get this thing out of here, stat. The other lesson I learned about decisive action is that sometimes when you're in a conflict or crisis, all you need to do is step back and be ready to act if it looks like someone is taking charge of the situation. The other story I want to tell you about conflict also comes from a different training episode during my citizen scientist astronaut training. So this was during a spacecraft egress and survival course. And basically what it consisted of was simulating a downed aircraft into the ocean. On the first day we were in a pool, and you can see that here behind me. We practiced maneuvers in deploying a raft and focused in creating survival chain formations and getting every man on our team, man and woman on our team, onto the raft. And the next day, just to make things even more fun, we did that in the 4 degrees Celsius Atlantic Ocean, which was kind of cold. So the first day, I was the team leader, and we executed our drills perfectly. We did it by the book. We did it how we were taught. The second day, we went out into the ocean, and one of my teammates was the team lead. And as he started to deploy the raft, I realized he was doing something out of sequence. And I started to say something, and then he looked me in the eye and he said, "It doesn't matter." And I pondered this for a split second. And then I realized that he was right, and it didn't matter. What mattered was our end goal was getting every man and woman on our team onto the raft and out of the cold ocean. And the learning point of this is that there's sometimes a time to say something and there's a time to step back. And you can pick your battles, but sometimes you're just picking a conflict. And sometimes the way to decide these things is taking a step back and focusing on the end game. What is your goal? In this case, to stop being cold and get on the raft. I want to say a few words about communication and language now. So I recently finished my residency in general practice, and I've learned a thing or two about communication during my time as a resident. And in fact, one of the best lessons I learned in communication comes from one of my old preceptors. And without fail, every single time I would finish engaging with a patient, I would come out, tell the medical story to my preceptor, and he had always had one guaranteed question. And he would say, "Yes, but did you ask the patient about hunting or fishing?" And it became kind of a running joke, mostly because I would always forget. It mattered to my preceptor because he was really big on hunting and fishing. But the bigger question he was getting at was, what did you do to build rapport with the patient? And some of the best physicians that I've seen engage with patients are the ones who take professionalism and make it their own definition. So when I was little, I used to be very, very strict with my vocabulary and my vernacular. The worst curse word I would use would be damn, and that would be if I was referring to a beaver hut. But some of the best physicians that I've seen are the ones who take away this power dynamic, and who put the physician and the patient on the same level by using that same language. So there are physicians out there who casually curse, who throw out a hell, a damn, and even the occasional bullshit, because that's the language their patient uses, and that's how they build rapport, and then their patient trusts them. And when their patient trusts them, when your patient trusts you, that's how you get information that you wouldn't normally get. That's when you get the patient who says, "I think these chest pains might be more than anxiety. I think things aren't okay at home and I don't feel safe there. I have a question about a very sensitive area, but I was too afraid to ask." It's by sharing that same language. And we also have to use different languages, even if we're conveying the same information. So I'll give you an example. If I said to you, "Dr. Smith, we have a 35-year-old male who has been admitted in critical condition. He's febrile, he has a fever of 39.9, he has altered LOC, has been dyspneic. We put him on life support, intubated him, started him on broad-spectrum antibiotics, including meropenem, vancomycin. He's received 3 liters of crystalloid, and he's on 3 vasopressors." And in the same instance, I turned to the family member and said, "Your son or husband is very sick. We're suspecting an infection. We're looking for the source. He's on very big gun antibiotics. And we're going to keep a close eye on him because he's not out of the woods yet." I've just conveyed the exact same sources of information to 2 different people, and the same message has been conveyed. But if I reversed the scenarios and told the doctor what I told the patient what I told the doctor would look at me funny, and the doctor would think I was an idiot. So we need to pick and choose our language when we're interacting with anyone, whether it's a friend, whether it's a patient, or whether it's a colleague. I also want to talk a little bit about nonverbal communication right now. In medical school, to build rapport and to gain a sense of openness and trust with patients, we're taught the solar method of body language. So adapted a seated, open, leaning, square-facing, eye contact maintaining, and relaxed position towards the patient. There's a big difference between calm and relaxed, and then closed, eyes crossed, arms crossed, and maybe head down. You're not showing your patient you're engaged. And in fact, they're teaching this to kids in primary schools these days. It's called the slant method. And kids, to show that they're engaged in what the teacher's saying, are taught the slant method of sitting up, learning and asking questions, actively nodding, and tracking the speaker. So while we're on the subject of communication, I want to talk about communication in tough times. I want to tell you about the time I met a patient who was there for what we call a meet and greet. And so when you're in a meet and greet, you basically get to know the patient, see why they're there, get to know their medical history, and also find out their concerns. In this particular case, the patient said to me, before we go too far into this, would you mind looking up a test result? I had some abnormal symptoms last week. I went to the emergency, they did some tests, and I would like to know more of what the test said before we go any further, just to put my mind at ease. This was a reasonable request. I wanted the patient to be able to focus on the rest of the interview, and I wanted to build rapport. And so right in front of us on the electronic medical health record, I pulled open the result. And I watched my own sense of disbelief mount as I read, within 3 minutes of meeting this patient and telling them that they had disseminated metastatic, palliative, end-stage cancer. And to go from meeting someone and saying hello to telling them they're dying is just as shocking them as it was to me. And this came back to being the adult in the room. I still at the time had to take a step back and ask myself, what is my duty to the patient in this case? I have to make sure that all the appropriate specialists are consulted. I need to make sure that they understand. I need to check in with my patient, see how they're doing, ask them if they have any questions, and then make plans for follow-up. There's a model in medicine that's actually used to deliver bad news. It's called the Spikes model, and it was actually published in the Indian Journal of Palliative Care. And basically, Spikes stands for setting up the interview and creating an appropriate setting. The P stands for determining the patient's perception. What do they know about their situation? And then getting an invitation from the patient to talk about their condition, because not everyone wants to know everything, believe it or not. Some would rather not know. And then once you've received their invitation and permission, you proceed to give your medical knowledge, all the while empathizing with them and acknowledging their emotions. And finally, creating a strategy, summarizing them, and asking them if they have any questions. It's a highly useful strategy, and I don't expect that every aspect of this is going to be relevant to you the next time you're facing a bad news scenario. But I guarantee you, as future leaders in this room, you may not all wind up being doctors, but maybe you'll be the head of a board. Maybe you'll be a CEO and you have to announce a round of layoffs. Maybe you have to tell someone in their department that they're not performing up to snuff. Maybe you'll be a politician and you'll have to deliver the news of an economic downturn. Bad news is going to be a part of life, and learning to read your audience and learning to deliver bad news in a way that's compassionate will go a long way in helping you deliver that. The other part I want to say about breaking bad news is that by giving the patient power, by getting their permission for you to give them bad news, and by getting their assessment of the situation, you're getting their assessment of how they want to be talked to, and you're making them part of the conversation. And suddenly when you have a situation such as stage 4 cancer where they might not otherwise have control, you're giving back them control. And in so doing, you're building a team of how you and your patient, or how you and whoever you're delivering bad news to, will attack your problem together. The other part of attacking bad news is practicing compassion. It's not something we're taught in textbooks. It's not something that comes up at the water cooler. It's not something we discuss with each other in everyday life. And by practicing compassion, I mean developing a sense of beneficence towards everyone you interact with. It sounds a little bit fluffy, but I think it's important to consider the implications of practicing compassion, because there seems to be a lot of vitriol in this world, in case you haven't noticed. And we'll talk about that a little bit later today. The other thing I want to talk about when it comes to breaking bad news, first of all, I want you to be the one who steps up and rises to this occasion, because not everyone will be able to do it, or not everyone will be willing to do it. And even if you want to be that person who takes on that challenge, Maybe the opportunities aren't there, but you can still go through the mental exercise of learning to play this game. So Chris Hadfield in his book, An Astronaut's Guide to Earth, called it the power of negative thinking. Tony Robbins calls it anticipatory thinking. I call it the what if game, as in what if such and such happens? How will I react? How will I manage the situation? And in doing so, you're mentally preparing yourself. And that's one component of resilience, which is what I want to talk about now. So resilience, for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, is essentially the sunflower growing in the desert. It's cultivating the capability to go on when times are tough. And there's this quote that's often falsely attributed to Winston Churchill that says, "Success is not final, failure is not fatal. It is the courage to go on that counts." And essentially what it's saying is if you get knocked down, get back up and go on. And resilience is equally important in times of failure as it is in times of success, because it's what will push you to go on, to drive harder, further, and stronger. We talked a little bit about one component of resilience. So we talked about the mental rehearsal. And I'm not going to focus too much on the first two, goal setting and positive self-talk. But for those of you who are interested, the picture's not showing up, but I actually have an entire TED Talk devoted to this. So I encourage you to look it up if you're interested. But I want to talk now about impulse control. And specifically, I want to talk about impulse control in the context of fear. I want to talk about fear, character, intelligence, and some of the lies we tell ourselves when we're talking about intelligence. I think the biggest lies that we tell ourselves is that these characteristics, that fear and personality traits and intelligence, these are all static traits, that if you're a failure once, you're a failure for life. If you're a success once, that you've succeeded for life. And I think the worst possible thing you can ever do is to believe your own hype. But let's focus on fear for a second. I often get asked in the talks that I give whether I have any fears. And I used to say no repeatedly until I thought about it. And I realized that I'm actually afraid of a lot, but I just tend to face those things head on in various ways. And it wasn't until I went skydiving and I was in the airplane at 14,000 feet, about to jump out of the airplane, that I realized that I wasn't afraid of heights. I was afraid of jumping from heights. And that's a pretty interesting realization to come through when you've got a parachute strapped to your back and you're 14,000 feet in the air and everyone else is jumping out like it's fine, and you realize, oh, hey, this is something that I signed up for but didn't sign up for. And I overcame that fear. You heard that I was going for my AFF accelerated free fall solo skydive certification. I actually completed that this year. But it didn't mean that I did that jump once and that was it. I was fine. I was magically cured of my fear of jumping from heights. Oh no, every time I jump from a height, I think twice. So, what did it take for me to get over my fear? It took multiple exposures. It took the worst case scenarios to happen, and it took doing it over and over and repeated exposures. So things did not always go right over my repeated skydives. On my second skydive, my radio failed, and I had to learn to land solo pretty quickly. On my skydives after that, I didn't achieve the proper body position, and I was asymmetric, and I spun out of control at 200 kilometers per hour, and that's less fun than it sounds. Luckily, spoiler alert, I survived. I was here. I pulled the cord on time, but that wasn't the only time it happened. The next time that happened, I hyperextended my shoulder, and if you've ever tried to land a canopy with a slightly injured shoulder that you can't quite lift, let me tell you, it's a challenge. But the point is, I got over my fear by repeatedly exposing myself to the stimulus, facing the worst case scenario, and also deconstructing it. This is the one time in which if everyone else is going to jump off a bridge, it's okay to do so too. So let's talk about the other lies that we tell ourselves about intelligence and personality and character traits. We have this idea that if we say of someone, oh, they're stubborn, or oh, I was always impunctual when I was young, that's always going to be true of us. But it's just like fear. These aren't static traits, they're dynamic. And I think that one of the biggest disservices that we do to ourselves when it comes to intelligence, especially what we do to our young people, is that we tell them that, oh, you're only going to be book smart, or you're only going to be athletically smart, or you're only going to be socially smart. So you're either a nerd or a jock or part of the in crowd. And the fact of the matter is we're so much more diverse than that. And every one of us, young or old, has the capacity to have intelligence in multiple domains. Obviously, we're talking about emotional intelligence tonight, but it extends far beyond that. And I think we're actually at danger and at risk of stunting the growth of those still in school when we say that, oh, this is your talent and you should focus on it. So I want to switch tracks now and talk a little bit about forging character. So I want to take you through a series of exercises on forging your character, knowing yourself. Because part of being the adult in the room is knowing your own reactions and taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture is realizing who you are. And if you haven't done this yet in your life, I really urge you and encourage you to take the 30 seconds to write down your 5 biggest values. And then I urge you to check in with yourself from time to time, maybe years apart, and see how that changes. Once you've established your values and you realize what is important to you, think about who it is that you want to be. And then assess the magnitude of the gap between who it is that you are and who it is that you want to be, and then set goals to minimize that gap and make a plan to close that gap. That's speaking to the big picture, and one question I like to pose about that is what I like to call the time machine question. So if you could go back in time 10 years, what advice would you give yourself? And I think it's important because it really gives us a sense of what aspect of ourselves do we wish we'd started working on earlier, or that we wish we could make better, or that we wish that we had started fixing. So that's the big picture view of concept of self and self-knowledge. When we talk about the day-to-day and emotional mastery, we're emotional beings. We get happy, we get sad, but we don't always have control over our emotions, and sometimes they come out at inopportune times. So the other part, it again comes down to detachment, is watching ourselves when we're experiencing emotion and saying, what is it that's getting me down? How am I reacting? And is this how I want to react? And how am I going to manage this negative emotion? What am I going to do to take control of this and make myself feel better? Is it going to be quiet contemplation, texting a friend, running it out at the gym, or hitting it at a heavy bag? I recently read a magazine article on emotional intelligence in Time magazine this week that noted that actually the more specific terms that we can give to emotions, the better we become at gauging and dissecting and dealing with those emotions. So rather than saying, I feel bad, you can say, I feel frustrated, or I feel irritable, or I feel angry. I would urge you, however, to take this article with a grain of salt, because it also says that you should cut back on caffeine, and that's one thing I'm not going to do. I once heard a psychologist say that the research has shown that there's 2 things that have been consistently shown to produce a good day. And that's first, engaging in activities that are pleasurable. So it can be playing with your dog, it can be watching Netflix, it can be hanging out with a friend. And or, this is not a mutually exclusive proposition, the other thing that will make you feel like you've had a good day is productivity. Doing something that makes you feel like you've accomplished something. It can be something small. You could have cleaned out that closet or gotten through some laundry, but that's accomplishment. So remember that when you're trying to manage your own emotions. We've alluded to this a bit earlier tonight, but I want to spend some time now talking about checking one's ego and the importance of it. The first and most important part of checking one's ego is taking ownership of our faults and our mistakes. And I'm probably dating myself with this reference, but there's a movie from 1994 called Clear and Present Danger, in which Harrison Ford, someone gets it, awesome, So Harrison Ford plays a CIA agent called Jack Ryan, and he's advising the president. And there's this scenario in which the media is coming to get sense of a scandal that has affected one of the president's close friends. And if the president's implicated, it could be bad news. And so Harrison Ford's advice to the president is, don't give them anywhere to go. If they ask you if you were friends, you say, no, we're good friends. If you say, no, if they say you were good friends, then you say, no, we're lifelong friends. Don't give them anywhere to go. Defuse the bomb before it starts. And the reason it's so important to take ownership, especially if you intend on being a change agent or a leader or someone in a position of power in the future, is because mistakes are going to happen. And by taking ownership of them, you're creating a plan to deal with it, that sequence of events should it happen in the future. And you're analyzing what happened in the lead up to that to make sure it doesn't happen again. And also you're giving your haters and detractors nowhere to go. And for those of you who are interested in the subject, I really encourage you to read one of my favorite books written by 2 retired Navy SEALs, and it's called Extreme Ownership. And it's certainly worth a read. The other part of checking your ego and being a leader and being an adult is learning to handle criticism with grace. And there's this really great quote by Marcus Aurelius who says, the first rule is to keep an untroubled spirit. Stay calm, chive on. The second is to look things in the face and know them for what they are. That's one way to handle criticism, but it's not always easy. Maybe someone didn't deliver that criticism in the nicest way. Maybe they said, hey, what do you think you're doing? Or that was terrible. Maybe you were really emotionally invested. Maybe you tried really hard, even if the criticism was given with the best of intentions. My second piece of advice in dealing with criticism then is to detach. Take a step back and say, what's the end goal? Why was this criticism given, and why am I going to listen to it? Someone didn't like the way I did my project. Was it valid? Could my project be better? Do I want to do better projects in the future? And the last piece of advice when it comes to dealing with criticism is to gain perspective. How do you do that? Give yourself a sounding board. You don't have all the answers, and you never will. Nobody on this planet does. But if you talk things out, if you have someone you trust who can guide you, you can perhaps change your perspective. My own dad is a sounding board for myself, and he's really helped me focus on the big picture and things like negotiations. Sometimes I'm tempted to negotiate more aggressively for myself because I don't want to be one of those statistics that say women don't aggressively negotiate. But then he reminds me, what's the bigger picture? It's a working relationship. It's a longer-term relationship. And suddenly, the smaller, short-term gain of a better negotiation, that one instance, doesn't seem as important. It's all about gaining perspective. So I just said that we don't always have all the answers. No one on this planet does. And that's why we need to learn to forgive. And this is one of the most important parts of learning to check our egos. And one of the scholars in this class, actually one of the Peter Lougheed scholars, is a mentee of mine, and we were talking out one of her personal conflicts. And she had said she and her best friend had a falling out based on values. Her best friend had apologized, but she said, no, he shouldn't have brought it up in the first place. I'm not going to forgive him. And what followed was a discussion on what the consequences of not forgiving were and what it would be like to not have her best friend who'd been her best friend for so long. And she ultimately emailed me, and turned it out she called him up and they worked things out. And her exact words were, we're BFFs again, which was fantastic. So when you're practicing forgiveness, realize the components. Yes, it's one thing to apologize. It's one thing to take ownership. But the most important part is, how are you going to make sure that that doesn't happen again? What action are you going to take? I'm going to switch tracks now, and in the time remaining to us, talk a little bit about teamwork. So who here has been subject to that mythical necessary monstrosity that is known as the team project or the group project? A few of you. Who here has ever said that, oh man, I ended up doing all the work? Who of you was proud of having said that? I used to be one of those people. I was always that annoying person. And I would pick up the slack, I would redo other people's work, and Sometimes it's a part of leadership. But one of the best quotes I've heard about leadership actually comes from that book, Extreme Ownership. And it's, make people a reason or a part of your team. Don't let them be an excuse for your team. So you can see in this picture here, this was our team project at the International Space University. I was one of the team managers, and I was the exact antithesis of what a good leader should be. I'd send out emails, not follow up on deadlines. I'd expect things to be done, and when things weren't done, I'd say, okay, I'm just going to do it. And instead of helping people become better and helping them along and motivate them to want to be part of the team project, I kind of let them fall aside just so we could say we have a project on time. And we could have just as easily had a project done on time and brought everyone as a part of it. You can see we look really happy there. Partially we were done, but I think mostly we were looking forward to never having to see each other again. So fast forward to my second big group experience. So I attended Singularity University in Silicon Valley on the NASA Ames campus in 2009, and the whole mandate of the university is to positively impact 1 billion people in 10 years using accelerating technologies. And we had a brilliant team of 9 people from 7 countries, and we focused on disaster response software. And we already had seasoned entrepreneurs. I think 2 of them had been CEOs. We had an internationally renowned software engineer. We had computer programmers, and myself as a medical student. And I didn't know where I fit into that. But I had a swag of experience in running meetings, organizing things, and leading committees. So I took it upon myself to be the group mom. I didn't have any real role of any mention. I didn't have a title to my name. But I was making things so much easier for my team. I was making sure deadlines were known. I was making sure that we knew when this deadline was due, when we were meeting with an external company who wanted to see our product, when we were having a faculty assessment. And knowing that us helping my team reach our end goal was far more gratifying than having a title of a manager or group lead. The other part of being a good leader is being a good teammate. I want to share with you some experiences from my time in Taekwondo. My instructor, who's also a good friend of mine, is an excellent coach. And when you're in Taekwondo, one of the neatest thrills you can have as a senior color belt or a newly minted black belt is when you're at competition and you're asked to coach a junior belt in sparring. Because the implication is that you have enough knowledge and experience to successfully help someone else win their match. And so one of our girls, we actually call them the twinjas because they're identical twin ninjas. They were both called up to fight each other, and one of our color belts came up to coach. And as he was about to step in the ring, our head coach caught him and he said, wait, you have to answer me these 3 questions. And he said, first of all, what's her favorite best sparring combination? Which is a reasonable question. Next he said, what is her favorite TV show? And then finally he said, who's her favorite Ninja Turtle? And our color belt couldn't answer those questions, and so our head coach stepped in to coach, because it's so important to know who it is that you're working with, leading, and helping become better. It's what will let you know how to motivate them, and it will also let you know how you can foster rapport with them. Later on in a tournament earlier this year in Lethbridge, I had a similar experience. But I share it with you because this was a different coach. He and I hadn't worked together before, and he hadn't had the time to know me. So even if someone had asked him questions about what my favorite breakfast cereal was, he wouldn't have been able to answer it. But what he did in the minutes leading up to competition, he took me aside and said, what are your best sparring combinations? And what do you need me to do? And what do you need to hear from me to win? And then that's all he did. He let me do my thing and then supported me in my role. And as soon as that match was done, we debriefed. He said, did that work for you? And what could I have done better? And this is a coaching role, but it's also a leadership role. And the lesson there is, when you're working with people, your job is to make them better. Your job isn't to be at the front of the helm. Your job is to be seamless, to be that mortar between the bricks. So, it had to come up. I was trying not to, but it had to come up, and we still have some time left. So why does emotional intelligence matter? So in case some of you have noticed, there was an election recently in the United States of America. The outcome was not exactly as some of us predicted. And some of us were downright floored and had various other reactions to this. And for myself, I kind of took this step back and wondered what this meant for my own interactions, or even if I could interact with people who had supported someone who, in my view, had done things that aren't in the best interest of his own country or even the individual, and can be downright mean. And then I kind of did that detachment exercise and took a step back and looked at my friends who had voted Republican and looked at their values. They weren't necessarily voting for Trump because they were supporting Trump, but maybe in one instance, they were very strictly pro-life and would not support a Democratic candidate. In another instance, a friend's livelihood was in the military establishment, and that in turn was a role that was more historically supported by Republicans than Democrats. In another instance, I had a friend whose values are very much based on economics and economic policies, and in his view, the Democratic candidate couldn't deliver, and in fact, in his view, was a threat to economic stability. So understanding my friend's values helped me avoid this rhetoric of, if you're supporting Trump, you're a misogynist, you're a racist, you're a xenophobe. It's so easy to buy into this outrage because it feels so good to be outraged. But when we use our emotional maturity to take a step back, we avoid making the same mistakes that we ourselves are condemning the president-elect of. We condemn him for sweepingly making generalizations against Muslims and Mexicans. But if we're condemning all Trump voters as xenophobes and misogynists and bigots, then we're doing the same thing. And if I were to invite any one of you to come to coffee with me and say, hey, we're going to have a fair and open discussion about our values because I want to know where you're coming from, but I say, I'm going to go first and I'll start by saying everything you stand for is wrong, you're not going to listen to me. And so that's why I encourage you in this climate, rather than straying away from conversation, from shying away from it, we have to foster dialogue, as hard as it is sometimes, and as much as we have to check our ego. I came across this infographic earlier this week, and basically the UK Independent, they had a little bit of fun, and they looked at what every single country in the world was #1 at. So if the Netherlands is ranked #1 for eating pizza, Hungary is ranked #1 for pornography and porn stars. The United States of America is ranked #1 for spam email. And Canada is ranked #1 for personal freedom. And that's amazing. And we don't want to lose that. And that's the other part of why it's so important to see the other side and foster discourse. Because when things like what's happening down south happen, we have to realize the potential and danger of those who don't have their own voice to speak up, for them to lose their voice and to have their own rights trampled on. Our scientific truths and policies protecting research and science are at risk, and it even happened in this country a few years ago. So let's keep that personal freedom at #1, and let's be grateful for it, but let's all realize our own responsibility as leaders, as emotionally intelligent and aware leaders, of how we protect that. And part of that comes down to cultivating empathy. A 6 can be a 9, can be a 6. One of the most eye-opening experiences I had came in medical school when we had a health unit on LGBTQ health. And we were in small groups, and we were specifically discussing gender identity dysphoria disorder. And we went through the thought exercise of saying, what would it be like to be a gender other than the one you were born with? Most of us are lucky enough to be cisgendered. We don't have to wrestle with that being outwardly female, inwardly male, or vice versa. But just go through the thought experiment right now and question your own gender. What if you're a female, but you're actually female outwardly appearing, but you're a male inside? What if you're a male, but you secretly want to be a female? What values would you have to give up, and what shifts in your thought would have to happen? it's really important to cultivate empathy, because then you see problems and trials and obstacles from the other person's perspective. And it gives you a whole new appreciation for the hardships that someone else endures. So you do this by fostering discussion, but you also do it through thought experiments. So we're coming towards the end of our time here today, and I have a small ask of you, because we just talked about how we are the most advanced country on this planet when it comes to personal freedoms. And I would argue that if you're in this lecture theater tonight, you're especially lucky. You're warm, you're educated, you're out of the snow, and you live in Canada. And I would ask you to pay what you've been given forward, because I feel like if you're in Canada, the universe is conspiring you for you to succeed. Pay it forward and help those who have not been born or do not live in these circumstances. And specifically in the context of leadership. When you become successful, when you become a leader, when you become a politician, a lawyer, a CEO, or a doctor, remember those who invested their time in you to mentor you, and pay it forward. I wouldn't be where I am today if a lot of busy people hadn't taken time out of their own schedules. When I was at NASA Ames, each one of Chris Hadfield, David Saint-Jacques, and Jeremy Hansen called me up of their own volition and said, hey, want to have coffee? Want to go fly a plane? Want to learn to sail? Yeah, of course I do. But the bigger part of that is they didn't have to do that. And just being around people who are so smart and who are so people-driven and who are so kind taught me a lot about becoming a leader, becoming smart, service, and being a mentor as well. So that's my last ask of you today. The last thing I want to tell you is that emotional intelligence isn't about dire consequences. It isn't only useful when we are in times of need, when things are going south. It's also there as cohesion. It's those little nuanced aspects of interaction, of watching your teammates and seeing what motivates them, and also lifting morale that builds team cohesion. So I encourage you as you go forth after tonight to spread mischief and spread laughter. This picture is from Thailand earlier this year when I inadvertently ended up there during the Thai New Year. And for those of you who don't know what Thai New Year is like, so there's the traditional offerings of monks going through the streets and offering them blessings. And then for some reason, it also involves haphazardly acquiring a super soaker and spraying anyone within your radius. And there's no holds barred. It doesn't matter if you're a foreigner. It doesn't matter if you look comfortable and dry. That makes you a target. And so on the first day, everyone partakes. And then depending on where you are in Thailand, maybe a day later, some people will still partake in the water festivities. And then maybe on the third day, everyone's going back to normal. So 3 days after Songkran, after the Thai New Year, I was walking along. I was dry, I was comfortable, and along comes this Thai boy. And he has a super soaker, and he eyes me, and I eye him, and I give him the worst side eye of my life, and I look at him. And he looks at me, and he laughs, and I laugh, and he knows no English, and I know no Thai, but we just communicated, and we just bonded because we know laughter is universal. So, when it comes to leadership, think about the traits of a strong leader. Think about what it is that you want to be and who you want to be as a person and a leader, but also think of those nuanced traits. Think of those things that will hold your team together. Think of the mortar between the bricks. Thank you so much for your attention.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. It's all about relationships, isn't it, really?
Yes.
It's all about understanding. And one of the things that struck me, and we are going to open it up to questions, we've decided, so there will be some people going around with mics, so if you have a question you'd like to, or a comment you'd like to make to Dr. Pandya, by all means. But it just struck me going to one of your many accomplishments, one of your many areas of activities, and that is being an astronaut. I can't imagine a context in which emotional intelligence is more important than being in a spacecraft or a space station with a bunch of other people. It must be an enormous challenge in that proximity and extraordinarily isolated environment. Do you have some stories or examples of that?
So I'm still undergoing my training. So I'm technically a candidate through the citizen scientist groups that we talked about earlier. But I do have a story. So Project Poseidon is an aquanaut program. So that's the one where I'll be under the sea for 100 days in 2018. And the application process for that was fill out the application, get invited for a phone interview, submit a research proposal, and then also submit a video as to why you want to be selected. And the thought process in applying for this was, how do I make myself a desirable enough candidate that I don't wind up sleeping outside for 100 days? And so that's where emotional intelligence comes into play, because when you're in close quarters, especially for a long duration, little things are going to get on your nerves. I saw Roberta Bondar talk once, and she said that she banned people from flossing when she was on the space station, or when she was in space, because floss and zero-G is kind of gross. And that created some conflict. That's exactly what happened. And that created some conflict. And so you have to realize you have to be so much more careful, because you never stop being a professional, because you're kind of always at risk of stepping on someone's toes or having someone step on your toes. So emotional intelligence and psychological resilience become really important in that closed atmosphere where you really don't want to end up sleeping outside.
And it is really interesting that we often think that we need to become competent, and competencies are very important, there's no question. I don't want to have somebody building a bridge that I'm going to drive over who's very empathetic but doesn't get the calculations right. But this other side of the coin is so important, and it's certainly one of the things that we're devoted to in the Peter Lougheed Leadership College, is to adding those soft skills that enable you to deploy your hard skills, and I think that's really important. I'm going to see, does anybody would like to ask a question or pose a comment to Dr. Pandya? When we've actually got some people running around with mics so that our people in the live stream can hear. Do I have any? Yeah.
Thanks for sharing tonight. Appreciate that. When it comes to interacting with emotional intelligence, can everyone hear me? Okay. And working with people, have you had opportunity to equip and mentor people in developing emotional intelligence, and what was that interaction like if you had?
The question was, have I had the opportunity to equip or measure people in emotional intelligence?
Mentor.
Mentor. Not in any official capacity, but really, I guess my tongue-in-cheek answer to that is the best way to learn about emotional intelligence is to give a talk on it. But really, it's something that can be practiced in daily life with those exercises that I'd mentioned during my talk. So, making a list of what it is that gets you down, what you do about it, making a list of things that make you happy, and using that when that gets you down. And then looking at your values, and then looking at if that's everything you're acting as is in accordance with those values, because that's a sense of discord. So that's how we can cultivate it in our daily lives. But as to the other part of your question, I haven't officially mentored someone in that capacity.
Is there a question here? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi. Your one slide about finding ways to spread mischief and happiness and that sort of stuff really appealed to me. Some may accuse me of doing that. What do you find that allows you to do in groups and teams that not spreading mischief and happiness, that sort of stuff, would prevent you from doing? Is it releasing of tension? Is it allowing people to open up? What does it do for you?
Sorry, say that question again.
It was a long question. You had a slide about mischief and happiness, spreading mischief and happiness. And I tweeted, I found my new life purpose, because really I have. What does it allow you to do with groups?
With mischief and laughter?
Yeah, what is that?
Oh, that's such a good question. basically, if you work with me in any capacity, whether it's on a medical team, even if it's in a crisis, whether it's in Taekwondo, my job is to, first of all, it's to teach you and do my job, but it's also to make you happy that you're there. And the way I do that is I have a really interesting vernacular. So when I'm teaching my junior black belts, for example, and I want them to do a technique better, I want them to remember it, but I want them to remember it in a positive way. So I tell them to make it gooder. And they're like, what are you talking about? That's not a word. And these are high school students. So they're like, you're educated. What are you talking about? But then they actually step up their game, and then the next class they said, yeah, I'm making it gooder. Or when something goes wrong, but we know what to do about it, you'll hear me say something like, son of a beached whale, mother trucker, like, you know, things that are swears but not swears that remind us that it's not such a bad situation, that we have control, there's still room for levity, let's get to it. So that's how I manage my mischief in daily life.
Actually, there's a lot of interesting research that shows that humor is a great pedagogical device, that when you make people laugh, you do create this sense of connectedness, and so it's really, there's nothing frivolous about it. It's a really good way of teaching people, so it's good on you. It's a good thing. Is there anybody else who wants to ask a question? Particularly, I think you have students who are not going to be part of the master class, if some of you would like to ask a question. Can you see back there? Do you give a microphone? Thank you.
In the context of emotional intelligence, when you're leading an international group and you haven't had the time to get to know each of them personally, how do you manage to lead a group and when everybody has different nonverbal cues naturally from their cultural backgrounds?
That's a really good question. So the question, for those who didn't hear, was when you're working in an international group and you haven't had the time to learn the idiosyncrasies behind everyone's individual character, how do you deal with that? And I would point to the times when I did things wrong. So I did my master's at the International Space University, which the philosophy of which is international, intercultural, interdisciplinary. And so during our year, we had 50 students from 31 countries, and everything was group work. And so you couldn't not work with in an international setting. And you learned very quickly that work styles, work ethics, work hours, they're so different. And I think it comes back to what I was quoting you earlier from that book, Extreme Ownership, is that make people the reason for your team, not an excuse for it. And when you're young and you have your own way of doing things, especially in North America, we're very, this needs to be done yesterday, type A, go, go, go. You tend to take over. And when you do that, you tend to step on other people, and you also tend to deprive yourself of learning experience and another cultural experience. So the answer is to restrain yourself, and it can be hard, but let people flourish. You know, give them contingencies, have them check in, but let people work and they'll surprise you. And that's true of intercultural settings, and that's true of any group dynamic, I think.
I think we have time for one more question. Is there somebody there? Got the mic? Go ahead.
Okay. Hi, my name is Remy. And so you had mentioned that how important to have emotional intelligence as a leader. And we also have the module content about how important the emotional intelligence is, but they did not give us specific suggestion to practice on that. So what kind of suggestion or advice you could give us, and so we can practice, improve our emotional intelligence?
So the question is about what practical suggestions can you do to improve your emotional intelligence? And so I'll just reiterate some of the exercises that I talked about during my presentation, as well as the thought experiments. So the first exercise is write down your values. Even stick around 30 seconds after this lecture, do it outside, write down your values, know who you are, and then ask yourself the question, is everything you're doing in line with those values? And if not, why? And then how do you bridge that chasm? And then on the day-to-day, watch your emotions. You know, when you wake up in the morning and if you're me and it's pre-coffee, I'm irritable. But I know that I'm irritable, and so I manage that, for example. So watch your emotions. Watch, you know, and kind of experiment with that slide that I put up about how emotions are processed. Just because you feel, you know, anger in your heart, does that mean you're angry, or is that your body just acting like it's angry, you know? If you're feeling that globus, that throat full sensation, are you sad, or is your body telling you it's sad? It's an interesting thought experiment. The other thought experiments I would encourage you to engage in is the what if game. You know, what if the worst happens, or what if this happens? How am I going to react? Am I prepared for it, or am I woefully underprepared? And then, of course, the last thought experiment of going outside our comfort zones and saying, what is it like to be in this scenario? What is it like to be in this person's shoes? So those would be my practical points.
You know, it's interesting. We're going to adjourn shortly to, and the students will go on to do their master class. But the last, one of the last slides you put up with Donald Trump, you know, it's very difficult to teach leadership development to young people in the age of Trump, because he is in many ways the antithesis of everything we would like to cultivate in our students. There is a kind of emotional intelligence which allows you to manipulate people, and great demagogues know how to press buttons, and we all have buttons you can press, every one of us, it doesn't matter where we are. You frame something, you press a button, and you can then put people, and so we have to, I think, also be aware of what our own buttons are and when somebody's pressing them. But one of the things that's interesting following Donald Trump, and I am the first one to admit that I think it's a catastrophe that he's been elected, but one of the things that's so worrisome is his lack of emotional control. The fact that he cannot resist tweeting, you know. We talk about people who have difficult things, you know, Meryl Streep, who gave actually quite a calm and reasoned brief talk about being kind to one another at the Golden Globes. You know he's going to come out, you know he's going to say that she's overrated, you know, and the interesting thing about that is, I suppose there may be some of his followers who eat it up with the spoon, but it really makes other people uncomfortable and uncertain. And I think it's true that when you have a chance to relate to people who've developed their emotional intelligence, not just that they are plugged into you and kind of are interested in how you're feeling and whatever, but when they're also in control of themselves, it really inspires confidence. So it's not just that you don't say a lot of things that will get you into trouble because you control yourself. But by not doing that, and by having that, I think it's a remarkably effective technique for inspiring confidence in people. And it isn't to say that you're not going to get some demagogue who, for a whole variety of reasons, finds himself in a position that worries you. But I think what you're talking about and the mechanisms and the suggestions you've given are really important because one of the things that we talk about President Obama is his cool, is the confidence that he inspires about, it's not about him. And I think it's that when you are emotionally intelligent and responsive, perhaps it's a kind of generosity of spirit that you're indicating that you aren't a narcissist, it isn't all about you, that you really care. So I think it's something that is enormously effective. And I think tonight you have actually looked at the phenomenon of emotional intelligence from so many different perspectives and so many kind of practical ways. And you, in your amazing life, have so many contexts in which emotional intelligence, I think 100 days under the water, oh my gosh, is going to be put to its test. But thank you so much. We all, we marvel at all that you've achieved in a short period of time. We look forward to watching for the many more things that you will do in the space and under the water, etc. But thank you most particularly for sharing with us tonight all that you've learned as you've been doing these things and the value of it. So Shawna Pandya, welcome to PLLC. Thank you so much for being here. We're really, really proud and honored and enlightened by your talk.